Coming up on 2020 on ID, a 17-year-old girl swept off her feet by a local bad boy.
He knew how to rob houses and hotwire cars, and I was like, we're gonna go in this house? Okay.
But did their cross-country joyride become a trip to the dark side?
A well-known, well-liked couple is murdered in their beds.
Did she commit murder to prove her love?
I did not kill anybody. I promise you guys this.
Or were these two men the real culprits?
I had absolutely nothing to do with this.
2 dead, 2 sets of suspects, and a lost ring that will help uncover the truth. Who is guilty? Welcome to 2020 on ID. I'm John Quinones. It was a classic case of whodunit. Who could have murdered a farm couple in cold blood as they lay sleeping in their bed? Was it a random stranger or someone closer to home? As Deborah Roberts first reported in 2010, it was a crime that shook a close-knit farming community to its core.
It was one of those holidays when everything seemed right.
Well, Easter Sunday was a beautiful day. We had wonderful worship service.
The kind of day, says Pastor John Walker, that made you happy you lived in the tiny farming community of Murdock, Nebraska.
It's definitely a Norman Rockwell type of thing. It's not just a place where you live, but it's a place where you've got your roots.
That was certainly true for Sharman and Wayne Stoke, a prosperous farm couple whose family had tilled this land for generations.
This couple was well-liked, well-known.
Two of the kindest, most open-hearted, warm-hearted, and friendly people that you'll meet.
As they watched the grandkids hunting for Easter eggs on the front lawn, did they have any thought this would be their last day alive? There was no warning. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, 2 people arrived at the Stokes' isolated farmhouse. They entered through a side window, navigating the confusing layout with seeming ease. They climbed the stairs to the bedroom, and then for legendary crime scene investigator David Kofod, it became one more gruesome scene.
You've seen a lot of pretty bad stuff.
Yes.
How did this stack up?
It was kind of like something out of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. A couple in their upstairs bedroom in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, a farmhouse, and they were brutally murdered while they were sleeping.
Kofod and his investigators pieced together what must have happened.
The first shot missed the male victim and hit the bed.
In those chaotic moments, it appears Wayne Stoke fought for his life.
The suspect got the gun away and then shot the victim in the knee.
He was found tangled in his bedclothes in the doorway to the bedroom.
The male victim was trying to crawl away, and then he was shot in the back of the head at close range.
What did Sharman think in those last few seconds as she struggled to dial 911?
She was shot in the face.
Local police in this rural community had little experience with brutal homicide. So they called in the pro from Omaha. If anyone could figure this one out, it was Kofod.
He is the Douglas County Crime Scene Investigation Unit.
Police are busy this
Mary Williams reported the story for KMTV.
He was the man. He was the go-to guy.
When other people couldn't seem to solve these crimes, you could. How is that?
I was like a dog with a bone, you know, that would keep going and going and going.
In the community of Murdock, there was disbelief.
It was, of course, total shock.
They hear a well-known, well-liked couple is murdered in their beds. The fear factor comes into play right away. This is a place where you don't lock your doors, but you're locking your doors tonight.
At the Stokes Memorial Service, the pastor invites people to write down their feelings.
Out of the 350 pieces of paper, 250 of them said the same thing. That was why.
Speculation was rampant. Could this crime simply be a random act of violence by strangers? But as anyone in law enforcement will tell you, random crimes are rare.
Like 84% of all murders are committed by close family members or friends.
So that's logically who you're going to look to begin with.
And for Kofod, there were a lot of clues pointing to an inside job.
It was a dark gravel road. It wasn't near the interstate. It wasn't near any major highways. It appeared to us that somebody knew where they were going and how to get in the house and how to go up into that bedroom. Also, we didn't see any indication of robbery. There was no jewelry missing. This money was right out in the open. So we thought, well, this has got to be a personal attack.
Attention quickly began to center on two men.
How did Matt Livers and Nick Sampson become the focus of the investigation as suspects?
The focus of the investigation turned towards Matt Livers based largely upon interviews with the Stoke family.
Guys, I had nothing to do with this.
Matthew Livers, the 28-year-old son of Sharman's sister, was reportedly angry.
There was some thought that Matt Livers had disagreements with Wayne Stoke and that might have been the motive for the killings.
He was a disgruntled nephew that felt left out of the financial rewards of the family.
That's when the rumors started swirling. Oh, why would he do this? What did he have to gain? Was there bad blood?
Under police questioning, he admitted having problems with Wayne and Sharman.
What did Wayne say to you? Or is this a combination of all those years of just treating you like you're some black sheep? That's what I felt like.
The brother of the woman who was killed told the police, my sister always told me if anything happens to me, tell the cops to look at Matt Livers. That's pretty significant.
Livers was close with his cousin Nick Sampson, and during the investigation, police discovered some interesting coincidences. The night of the murder, a suspicious tan car was spotted near the farmhouse. Livers and Sampson had access to a tan car, and it turned out it had been thoroughly cleaned the morning after the murder.
The car was detailed at 5:30 in the morning on that same day, which is an awful odd coincidence.
Through many hours of interrogation, Livers denies everything.
I didn't do it. You're full of you did too.
But gradually, police start to get to him.
We're not saying you're a bad person, Matt, okay? We believe that Wayne pushed you over the edge. I've heard from so many people that I've interviewed about you, your temper's like that. Okay?
Finally, after 5 hours of questioning, Livers begins to confess.
The truth is, you got a gun, right or wrong? Right. And you took that gun back to your Uncle Wayne and Aunt Sharman's house, right? Right or wrong? Come on, man. Right.
He tells them he and Nick Sampson were responsible, giving details only the killer could have known.
Then I put the gun to her face and blew it away. Okay. And then as I headed out, I just stuck it to him and blew him away.
Prosecutors charged the couple's nephew, Matt Livers, and cousin Nick Sampson with the double murder.
You got a guy who said he did it. He's related to the deceased. It fits the pattern. Case closed.
But there was one small problem as prosecutors began putting together a case against Livers and Sampson. There was no physical evidence.
No fingerprints of Sampson and Livers at the farmhouse?
No.
None of their blood so far has turned up positive?
No.
And not a trace in the car Livers said they'd use. Another problem. Livers took it all back the next morning.
I've been just making things up to satisfy you guys.
Investigators didn't believe him, but under Nebraska law, they needed more than just a now recanted confession. They needed proof. So they sent in the best of the best, the guy who could find evidence when no one else could.
They had you take a second look at the car.
Right. Well, you know, if they drove the car, there's got to be something there. So I went through areas that I know that we hadn't looked at earlier.
He swabbed under the steering wheel and found, lo and behold, a single tiny drop of blood.
I think it ended up being 7 nanograms of DNA, which is...
That's a speck.
You can't see that with a microscope.
When the swab came back from the lab, there was a match.
It's Wayne Stock, the male victim's blood.
You've got a confession, and now the evidence they were looking for to tie the bad guys to the scene of the crime. Double whammy.
But a new witness was about to turn up. And what she had to say about Livers and Sampson would soon turn this case upside down. There was someone else in the farmhouse bedroom that night.
They all believe that Livers and Sampson were involved and all this stuff, and I was like trying to get these people to believe me, like no. And it's like they didn't want to hear it. They weren't there with me. Me and Greg were the only people there.
Stay with us.
Sharman and Wayne Stoke have been found murdered in their bed. Authorities believe they know who did it. But a mysterious new piece of evidence is about to blow the case wide open. Once again, Deborah Roberts.
A brutal murder followed quickly by a confession.
Who was responsible for the deaths of Wayne and Sharman? I was.
The case seemed all but wrapped up, but there was this one loose end, a gold ring found on the kitchen floor.
You were just thinking that maybe a family member might have dropped it.
At the time, it didn't seem significant.
Trouble was, this ring didn't seem to belong to anyone, not to Mr. and Mrs. Stoke or any of their relatives, and not to Matt Livers and Nick Sampson, sitting in jail.
The ring had an outer inscription that said, "Love always, Corey and Ryan."
One of David Kofoed's bright young Douglas County investigators named Christine Gabig decided to get to the bottom of it.
And you can see that the inscription is kind of unique because it's on the outside of the ring. And then this mark over here, I wondered if that would be something that would allow us to trace it.
You know, it's still just good old-fashioned shoe leather police work. She looked up AAJ. There's only 2 of them in the United States.
When I called, it was their last day in the office. This company had gone bankrupt, and this woman was just there cleaning out the office.
She would have called the next day. They would have been gone.
It took 70 phone calls, but Gabig eventually traced the ring to a Walmart in Wisconsin.
She found out that the ring was bought by a girl named Corey. She bought it for her boyfriend, Ryan.
So they found the boyfriend, and he said, yes, I had this ring, but it was in my truck, and my truck was stolen.
Turns out the truck and ring had been stolen 2 days before the murder by a pair of teens on a joyride that began in Wisconsin and ended in Louisiana. But what had happened in between?
So at this point, you're thinking,
how did this ring get into a farmhouse in Nebraska? That was the thing.
And more it began to seem like the ring might have walked into the farmhouse on the finger of this girl, Jessica Reed, a 17-year-old former Wisconsin high school honors student who had picked every parent's worst nightmare of a boyfriend, Gregory Fester.
He was interesting because he was different. Like, he didn't care what people thought. He was really dark.
But 19-year-old Fester's attraction to the dark side was leading Jessica into uncharted territory. A multi-state crime spree she chronicled with a map and a disposable camera.
He knew how to rob houses and hotwire cars and do all these crazy things that I had never really been around before, and I was like, steal a car, you know, okay. We're gonna go in this house, okay.
In Wisconsin, Jessica committed her first break-in.
Like, to be in somebody else's house. The adrenaline rush was crazy, like, but you're paranoid and you're like freaking out and you're just like, oh my God, and you're rushing around, and it like pumped me up a lot, you know, like it had my blood moving.
The stakes were going up. In addition to the red Dodge pickup and money, they take a 12-gauge shotgun and ammunition. Oh, and a gold ring.
Yeah, I wore the ring because it was pretty.
We didn't know about the ring at all until all of a sudden we heard about a couple of teenagers from Wisconsin who'd gone on a crime spree.
But Kofoed said detectives working the case didn't seem interested in that ring.
The investigators at that point were thinking, we've got our guys in jail.
Right.
This isn't that big of a deal for us.
No, they had a confession, and then the guy that confessed linked his cousin. It was a done deal.
Matt Livers and Nick Sampson are in jail charged with homicide. But we now know that sometime on the night of April 16th, Jessica and her boyfriend crossed from Iowa into Nebraska.
We were going to rob another house, and if he said it was okay, you know, I trusted him enough to be like, all right, it's okay, because that was one of the things that I told him, you know, make sure there's nobody home. because I don't, you know, you never know what can happen and stuff. And he said it was okay, so I said, all right.
They didn't know it, but they were on a collision course with death.
We were just listening to music.
She says it was a song by 9 Inch Nails called Downward Spiral.
And all of a sudden he was like, this is the house. And I was like, okay.
On a completely dark night, they stop outside a farm on a gravel road.
I had a really, really, really sick feeling in my stomach, but I just ignored it because I was like, you're just scared, you know, you're just freaking out.
What happened next would lead to not one, but 2 separate trials and put Jessica Reed in the interrogation room with the same investigators who questioned Matthew Livers. Would she tell the truth?
I didn't have a gun. How am I supposed to kill somebody without a gun? I did not kill anybody. I promise you guys this.
But that's not what she told 2020 when we caught up with her. Stay with us. A gruesome double murder, a confession, but now the discovery of a gold ring puts 2 new suspects in jail, 17-year-old Jessica Reed and her boyfriend Gregory Fester. And the evidence against them is adding up.
Jessica Reed and Greg Fester's DNA matched the DNA from the ring. We have them at the crime scene.
Lead CSI Kofod gives the lab results to the police detectives, but says he's a bit surprised by the reaction.
Initially, they weren't real excited about it because they had their guys.
Prosecutors charged the couple's nephew, Matt
Livers and Nick Sampson have already been charged, and police aren't ready to concede they have the wrong men.
They still believe that they were somehow involved.
I think maybe even to this day some of them do.
In fact, when police begin questioning Jessica Reed, it quickly becomes clear they want her to say that Livers and Sampson and their tan car were at the murder scene too.
I am not lying. I swear to God, I don't know any of those other people.
You have a nice rest of your life. What's left of it.
No, you guys, seriously, listen to me. I don't know those other people, okay? I have no idea who they were. It was me and Greg by ourselves.
They were trying to convince me that Nick Sampson and Matt Livers were involved, and they'd tell me all these different stories about it, and I'd be like, but I don't remember any of that.
But then her questioners upped the ante.
If you don't get the death penalty, okay, you will rot in death row until you pass away.
Faced with the electric chair, Jessica suddenly says she remembers Livers and Sampson.
Did you meet this guy at the bar too? Was he with him at the bar?
Yeah, they were together.
At first, I was like, no. And then they were like, we're going to kill you. You're going to get the death penalty. And I was like, okay, everybody was involved. That's what I was like. I was like, yes, I'll tell you whatever you want me to.
The new police theory is that Jessica and her boyfriend met Livers and Sampson at this bar in Murdoch, and then went with them to Wayne and Sharman's house to rob it.
And you followed them in this car?
As much as I can remember, yeah.
But after the Nebraska police leave, she asked for a private meeting with a Wisconsin detective.
I don't even know what to say, Detective Roy. You know, can you shut that door for a second? I want to tell you something.
And tries to set the record straight.
I don't know these other 2 people they're talking about. They won't let me tell them the truth. They are not involved in it. Somebody please believe me. Please?
It was hard to believe Jessica Reed entirely, because when it came to her own involvement, her story kept changing. At first, she puts it all on her boyfriend.
Greg blew the guy's head up. And he shot a hole through the lady's face.
Oh, he did? Really? And you didn't have nothing to do with that?
What was I supposed to do?
Got a letter dated 4/22/06. It's in a box of stuff with a road atlas.
Yeah, I
And
know
clothes.
the box you're talking about. I know the letter you're talking about.
I killed someone. He was older. I loved it. I wish I could do it all the time. If Greg doesn't watch it, I'm going to just leave one day and go do it myself.
You're in a lot of trouble, young lady.
And she kept a grisly keepsake from that night, a shotgun shell used in the murders.
I didn't kill this guy, though. I didn't have a gun.
But to 2020, Jessica Reed admits that's not entirely true. When she followed her boyfriend into the Stoke house on Easter Sunday, she says she was carrying a loaded .410 shotgun, too.
Okay, I started to look around and Greg said, no, come this way. So I followed him and we went up the stairs. And that's when he had turned on that bedroom light and I seen that guy. And I told him, you know, let's do something, let's get out of here, you know. And then that's when everything had happened.
She says Fester's first shot only wounded Wayne Stoke.
They were fighting with the gun. It startled me and my gun went off. It's not like I purposely shot at the guy. It's just my gun went off and I thought that I hit him.
2 guns, 2 shooters. But experts agree it was Fester who fired the fatal shots, spraying the evidence that eventually led to their capture.
I remember when we were driving away, I had looked down and there was blood all over me. And it was just everywhere.
Though the blood washed off, Jessica says what she will never be able to get rid of is the memory of Charmin's last scream.
I've never heard anybody scream like that in my life.
She now says the letter she wrote came out of the complicated feelings of a 17-year-old in love with a killer.
He was just okay with it, but I wasn't okay with it. I had been okay with robbing people, I had been okay with stealing cars, and I had been okay with everything. Up until that point, I was just like, whoa, that I'm not okay with. But somebody that I had been trying to get to think I was cool or approve of me pretty much or whatever. So I think in a sense, that was my way of showing him, you know, I'm okay with this too, like you are.
Had it not been for that ring, they might never have been caught.
I didn't even realize that I had lost my ring until we were all the way in Louisiana. I think my ring just flew off when I was picking up my coat.
But as Jessica Reed goes through more than 8 different interrogations, police kept coming back to the man who had confessed, Matt Livers.
If somebody else was in jail, why would they have confessed to being involved in the homicide?
I have no idea because they're crazy. They could.
That was the stumbling block for investigators. Livers had confessed. Surely he and his cousin must be involved. And remember, police weren't just going on the confession. There was DNA evidence linking Livers and Sampson to the crime, too. The blood found in that tin car. The blood found by David Kofod.
Did anybody begin to wonder about your blood specimen?
Obviously, eventually they did.
One of those who wondered was Special Prosecutor Clarence Mott.
This was an extraordinarily bloody crime scene. It would be highly likely that the real killers would have blood on their person in some way, shape, or form. And unless the killers are highly professional and very self-aware, killers are not going to clean the brake pads or the kick panels or other areas of the car. The investigators looking at that could not understand how it could be that David Kofod finds that speck of blood under the dash when there's no blood anyplace else.
The conclusion he came to would rock the world of Nebraska law enforcement.
The evidence demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that David Kofod planted the DNA of Wayne Stoke.
When we come back, the shocking turnaround.
Crime scene investigator Dave Kofod planted the victim's blood in the car.
The CSI hero accused of planting evidence? Stay with us. For 20 years, lead crime scene investigator David Kofod had been a Nebraska favorite son. Colorful, named Mr. Nebraska twice.
How did you get the title Mr. Nebraska?
This was all just a saturation state.
Beloved by law enforcement.
Really a very dedicated person.
and the media.
Long before the CSI Miami and all the TV shows, long before Hollywood made it sexy, he was doing the work and explaining it to us, and we were fascinated.
Almost a half inch.
David Kofod was available at all hours to talk to the media. He was a media darling.
Chief Crime Scene Investigator David Kofod walks us through the evidence.
Blood is fleeing off the weapon.
And it wasn't just hype. David Kofod was renowned for having solved some of Nebraska's biggest crimes.
One strike here.
For example, finding a minuscule amount of blood on this sword that helped put away defendant Chris Edwards for the murder of his girlfriend. And discovering the evidence that put away notorious Ivan Hank, convicted of the brutal murder of his own son. But now the investigator, well known for finding what no one else could, finds himself brought up on charges of planting that tiny speck of blood in the Stoke case.
I think shock best describes it. I'm not sure that anybody looked at Dave Kofod and said, you didn't do right by this crime scene, until you had two attorneys from Chicago file a lawsuit on behalf of Matthew Livers and say this was botched from the beginning. But they never mentioned Dave Kofod. And it wasn't until we saw an indictment that people started scratching their heads going, oh, wait a minute. Dave Kofod, he's an honest guy. He's the expert. He's the guy we all go to. This can't be right.
But it was becoming increasingly clear that the wrong men were in jail for the murders of Sharman and Wayne Stoke. And now it was Kofod on the hot seat.
So how do you explain the drop of blood in the car linking stock to this car when it turns out these two men apparently had nothing to do with it?
The most logical explanation to me is that because it was such a minute amount of blood that it was some kind of transfer from the scene to a piece of our equipment.
In other words, contamination. When he swabbed the car, Kofod said he used what's called a presumptive blood test kit. Inside the kit, a container of round swabs called filter paper, stacked up like potato chips.
Like a Pringles can, where you'd have to reach in to get the Pringles, and your fingers are going to touch not just the top chip, but the second and third and fourth chip.
Kofod said he thinks the kit he used to swab the car had also been used before, at the Stoke crime scene, where it coincidentally might have become contaminated.
But how do you explain it, though? Because you've got two other people who confessed to this crime.
Right.
The two men who were charged apparently had nothing to do with it,
right.
Yet there's a trace of blood in the car.
Yeah.
It doesn't add up to a lot of people. You found this blood,
right.
A trace of blood, whereas your colleague who's in the car finds nothing.
It had to be contamination.
The prosecutor has a different theory. He figures this is what happened. You have two inexperienced small-town police officers. They think they've got their men, but they're in a jam. They have no evidence. So they turn to you, the guy who's the expert at all of this stuff, to get them out of the jam.
If I was to plant evidence, and I didn't, but if I was to plant evidence and I wanted to do this, I would have locked those guys tight. We had all of their clothing, we had their shoes, we had a pair of Nick Sampson's jeans with a possible blood stain on them. It doesn't make any sense to me at all that we would plant evidence in somebody else's car.
Yet Kofod is put on trial, first in federal court on a kind of technicality, the rather narrow charge that he falsified and misdated a report.
Well, I certainly misdated my report, and that was a mistake. That's all that was a mistake.
Many in law enforcement and the community backed him up.
My God, a misdated report. We don't have anything more serious in this country, in this town, than a misdated report. You've got to be kidding me.
He also passed a polygraph. Not once, but twice.
And on September 10th of 2009, he was found not guilty.
I've never seen a jury come back that quick. I think the door was still closing in the jury room when they came back out.
Steve Leffler was Kofod's attorney.
It's ludicrous to even say it out loud, that Dave was somehow trying to help the cops by planting this evidence. I mean, what is the motive to do that?
If you were going to do something like this, someone with the type of experience that we have, they'd never be able to catch you. If this were something that he fabricated, if this were evidence that he had planted, it is the worst job I have ever seen.
He had a federal trial. He walked away from that.
But it's not over for Kofod. Prosecutors in Cass County decide to try him again, this time on more serious charges, having planted false evidence.
I think what's ironic is that a special prosecutor who is by trade a defense attorney refuses to recognize that contamination is an issue and that can happen because it doesn't suit his purpose as a special prosecutor to recognize that. But I guarantee you that down the road, when he has a case where he's going to use the fact that this could be contamination.
This is the case of State versus David Kofod.
And what about Matt Livers?
I had absolutely nothing to do with this.
If he's innocent, why would he confess? When we come back.
A gruesome double murder, 4 people in jail. But the case against one set of suspects is falling apart. Now the question remains, how did this investigation go so wrong? Once again, Deborah Roberts.
After 7 months behind bars charged with murder, Matt Livers and Nick Sampson are finally freed.
I'm innocent. I had absolutely nothing to do with this.
What's it been like for 7 months?
Tough.
Evidence shows it was actually Gregory Fester and Jessica Reed who killed Sharman and Wayne Stoke. But how did this happen? And why would Livers initially confess to a crime he didn't commit? Special Prosecutor Clarence Mock says it has all the hallmarks of a classic false confession.
Matt Livers denied having any involvement in the deaths of Wayne and Sharma Stoke over 180 times.
I didn't have anything to do with this. You did. I did not. You did.
It all seems so unbelievable, but according to the Innocence Project, about 25% of their wrongly accused cases involve a false confession.
Unfortunately, as it turns out, Matt Livers has some mental aspects that challenge him in terms of suggestibility.
We've got so many people sitting in that chair, okay, that think that they're smarter than us and you're not. No. Okay?
Something they perhaps should have been able to figure out.
You consider yourself a man? Then stand up. No, stand up and be a man, okay?
After hours of interrogation, experts say a suggestible person eager to please authority can be led.
The truth is, you got a gun. Right or wrong? Right. And you took that gun back to your Uncle Wayne and Aunt Sharma's house, right? Right or wrong? Come on, man. Right. And you walked upstairs in their house after hours. Right or wrong? Right.
But how to explain the specific details of Livers' confession?
Where'd you try to hit him when you fired that first shot? Is that me?
He learned a great deal from relatives and townsfolk that he conversed with between the time of the killing and the time that he was interviewed.
And what about that polygraph test Livers supposedly failed?
Was that true?
The review of the polygraph examination has indicated that perhaps the polygraph was not correctly scored.
But remember, in the months that followed, police also had what they thought was incontrovertible DNA proof that Livers and Sampson were involved. That tiny speck of blood found in their car. Which brings us back to David Kofod, now on trial for the second time in Cass County, Nebraska, for planting the blood evidence.
Once the evidence started playing out in Cass County, then you started seeing more people look at the evidence and say, he says he's innocent, but on paper some of these things don't add up. You definitely had opposing camps there. Still do.
It's cross-contamination.
Defense attorney Steve Leffler argued it was a simple case of accidental contamination, nothing more.
If Dave was this mastermind criminal, first of all, he would have planted it on a piece of evidence that would have directly tied Livers and Sampson to the scene.
He had access to articles of clothing from these two men. Why wouldn't he have planted serious evidence and really made sure he got the guys as opposed to a tiny speck?
It was a much more believable scenario that a very small amount of blood might be overlooked at a location where some other technician had failed to swab than something very obvious.
There was also a ring that was found.
Leffler also argued that Kofod was the guy who authorized Christine Gabick to track down the ring. Why would he plant evidence before knowing what secrets the ring might yield?
Does it make any sense that Dave, on the one hand, is going to try to convict these two guys, and on the other hand say to Christine, go find this?
I want to hone in on the issue of whether or not there was an accidental contamination.
But Special Prosecutor Mock says contamination was highly unlikely because there would have been no reason to use a test kit designed to find blood at a crime scene literally covered in blood.
There wasn't any need to figure out whether it was blood. It was obvious that there was blood.
Don Bays disputes that. He was one of the investigators at the scene that day.
Why would we do sampling and testing on the obvious? Because it's part of the checklist, I think. You're going to dust for fingerprints, you're going to look for shoe prints, and if you've got blood, you're going to test it.
But at trial, Bays could not say for certain that the test was used at the Stoke crime scene. Still, why would Kofod risk his 20-year career to help the police's case?
Dave's had a reputation of actually frustrating investigators because Dave won't make the facts fit to the theory that the investigators have. And so if Dave never crossed that line before, why is he going to cross the line now?
Yet some were saying he had already crossed that line.
Say hi.
Tell us about the Ivan Hank case.
Well, the Ivan Hank case was a tragic murder of a young boy by his father, Ivan Hank.
Say goodbye now.
Bye. Mom wakes up, can't find her little boy. And as a parent, crushing. And then you start realizing the facts. And the facts in the case were bloody garage and no body. And they knew right away that little boy was gone.
In a case with eerie parallels to the Stoke murder, Ivan Hank made a dramatic confession to the murder of his own son, Brandon, right on camera.
Brandon was an anti-crime killer.
It seemed crystal clear to police that he was guilty. But again, there was no evidence.
They looked everywhere to find the body of that little boy. Never turned up.
6 months after the body was allegedly placed into that dumpster, David Kofod claimed to have found the DNA under circumstances that would have been, at a very minimum, highly unlikely.
And lo and behold, a speck of blood is found in a dumpster. Sometime after the confession, sometime after the crime scene. Again, confession, blood evidence.
As far as Clarence Mock is concerned, Kofod's psychological motivation was clear: the need to be a hero.
He was the guy who could find the evidence that other people couldn't find.
So now there are other cases where folks are going back and looking at them.
There's a whole bunch of them, and I think they should look at every single one of them. I have no problem with that.
Does this happen in the world, the CSI world, planting evidence?
It does happen, yes. It has happened.
Maybe this makes sense in the world that you live in. Why not just place a little dot of something on the scene to solve the crime?
But it didn't solve the crime.
If you talk to those who believe he did it, I don't think they will tell you he did it because he wanted to be malicious. They believe he wanted to send the bad guys away, not to send the good guys away.
Have you ever planted any evidence?
No, never attempted to.
Even if you've had the toughest case where you know all you need is that one little thing to link somebody to the case?
I don't think you could ever justify going with one little thing, ever.
Unlike the first trial, this time there is no jury. David Kofod's fate rests in the hands of the judge.
The state has met its burden of proof and has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of the crime as charged, count 1, tampering with physical evidence.
For a divided Nebraska, strong emotions on all sides, including Kofoed's boss.
The men and women of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office hold our heads high and proud.
So what more can you take from him? You know, you've taken his dignity, his home, his car. He's destitute.
For Kofoed, whose career had already been ruined by the allegations, resignation.
I don't know if I was shocked as much as disappointed.
2020 sat down with him just 9 days before his sentencing.
So now you're staring at jail time.
Oh, I'm convinced that I'll get jail time, but I'm also going to appeal it. I don't see the difference with what the testimony was in both trials. I don't see the evidence was the same to me. The emphasis on the first trial was that I intentionally falsified, manufactured a report. What's the difference between that and intentionally manufacturing evidence? It's both the same thing. Maybe it's a technical, I don't know the difference between the two. In fact, I didn't see any difference in the two trials as far as evidence that went before a judge or the jury.
He maintains he didn't do it, and he will go to his grave maintaining he didn't do it.
One of the things I fear most in my career is when I represent somebody who's truly innocent. I think that if Dave goes to jail, an innocent man's going to jail.
On June 1, 2010, Kofoed began serving a 20-month to 4-year sentence. He plans to appeal. But as the reverberations from the case begin, the civil lawsuits for police misconduct, the re-examination of other cases Kofoed was involved in, what everyone agrees on is how precarious justice sometimes can be.
But for the finding of the ring, Livers and Sampson may very well be on death row right now.
Jessica Reed and her boyfriend, Gregory Fester, are serving life sentences. And for her, an impressionable 17-year-old who followed the boy she loved into a farmhouse that night, there can be no atonement.
I'm glad that they found that ring. I think about what happened a lot, and like, I've accepted my life sentence. I mean, I get really frustrated with being here sometimes, like, I'm sick of these people telling me what to do, but the one thing that I haven't been able to accept yet is what happened. Everybody's like, well, if God forgives you, you should forgive yourself, but it's not that easy. I had no right being in that house.
As of 2014, Jessica Reed and Greg Fester have been unsuccessful in their appeals. Matthew Livers and Nicholas Sampson reached settlements with Nebraska authorities on their civil rights claims and were awarded judgments against David Kofoed. Ivan Hank and Christopher Edwards are also accusing Kofoed of planting evidence in their cases, but so far have failed in having their convictions overturned. David Kofoed, meanwhile, was unsuccessful in his appeal and served 18 months in prison. I'm John Quinones. Join us next time for another edition of 2020 on ID.